Hello everyone, this is Sarah and welcome to my crochet channel. Today's video I'm going to be showing you how to make my fall ponchette. And it's called a ponchette because it's not as long as your average poncho. It's more like a shawl poncho than a regular poncho. The pattern comes in 5 sizes ranging from extra small all the way up to 2X. And don't worry, I'll give you those stitch counts as we go along. And you can also find this pattern on my blog, and I'll put that blog link down in the notes underneath this video. To make the ponchette, you're going to need some worsted weight number 4 or medium weight number 4 yarn. And depending on the size that you make, you're going to need anywhere from 12 to 24 ounces. And remember, the pattern goes from an extra small to a 2X. So you choose the size that you need for you. I'm going to be using the Karen Big Cakes, and the color of this one is called Cranberry Crisp. And that's what I'm going to be using for our demonstration today. This one that I have here, I did in 2 different colors. I did a solid rust and then a variegated, and then I changed back and forth from the rust, the variegated, and the rust. But for today's demonstration, I'm just going to be moving straight through the yarn. And I wanted to show you this. It has beautiful colors and it's going to work great. But I had a little bit of a yarn barf issue, so I'm going to have to fix that before I get started. Now you're going to need a nice big button because the ponchette has a buttonhole and a flap there. And I'm going to be using this big orange button for my demonstration today. And this button, it's about 1.5 inches, maybe a little bigger. So you're going to need about a 1.5 to 2 inch button, and it needs to be one that you can use, not just for decoration. We're going to be stitching today with our eye hook, and I'm using an eye hook that's a 5.25 millimeter crochet hook. Now some of the crochet hooks that are eye are a 5.5, and that's a little bit of difference, but it will still work just fine. Just make sure to follow your measurements and your gauge. You'll also need a needle for weaving in ends and sewing on your button. And then the last thing you need is your scissors. We're going to start with the neck of our ponchette and then work our way down. And each size, of course, has a different amount of stitches that you need. We're going to be stitching foundation double crochets, or what some people call the chainless foundation double crochet. And this is going to give a nice stretchy neck for around the top of our ponchette. If you're making the extra small, and that's what I'm going to be making today, is the extra small, you're going to need 100 foundation double crochets. If you're stitching the small, you're going to need 104. If you're stitching the medium, you'll need 108. If you're stitching the large, you're going to need 112. If you're stitching the extra large, you'll need 116. And if you're stitching the 2X, you'll need 120. And although I've posted those numbers here, if you want to go and look at the blog, of course, again, that link is underneath this video. It will help you in determining which size to make, as I have the inch measurements for the neck on the blog as well. All right, so I'm going to make my slip knot. I'm going to chain 4. And I'm going to begin making my foundation double crochets. Yarn over, I go in the 4th chain and pull up a loop. Yarn over and only pull that loop through the 1st loop. that's our chain that we made. Now we're going to finish our double crochet. Yarn over, go through the next 2 loops, yarn over and go through the last 2 loops. Yarn over. Now we're going to go through that chain that we made, pull up a loop, yarn over and make our next chain. Yarn over, go through the next 2, yarn over and go through the last 2. Now when you're counting your stitches, make sure you count these first 3 as your first double crochet or your first foundation double crochet, and then count 1, 2, 3, and so on. And so since I'm making the extra small size, I'm going to make 100 foundation double crochet stitches. Now the entire poncho is stitched the same. The only difference is, of course, the amount of stitches that you'll need for each size. So the first row, we're stitching a row of foundation double crochets, and you stitch as many as you need for the size that you're making. And again, it's a good idea to reference that blog that has all the stitch counts and measurements on it so you know which size to make for you. Also, keep in mind that everyone stitches differently, and so measure the neck as you go. You may need to go up a size or down a size depending on how tightly or how loosely that you stitch. All right, so I have begun my foundation double crochet stitches, and I'm going to continue until I have 100 foundation double crochet stitches for the neck of my project. I've completed row 1 stitching my 100 foundation double crochets, and if you'll notice, I've got some stitch markers in here. And just a little tip when counting is what I do. For this one I needed 100 stitches, so what I did is I added a stitch marker for every 25. Then I don't have to go all the way back and count all my stitches. And now that I know that I have 100, I can go ahead and take out these stitch markers. If you don't have stitch markers, you can always just use another piece of yarn that's a different color to mark your stitches. All right, now we've completed our first row, and you need to have the amount you need for the size that you're making. We're going to chain 1 and turn. We're not going to join just yet. And for row 2, we're going to place 1/2 double crochet in each of these stitches across. So yarn over. Our chain 1 does not count as a stitch, and so we're going to go right in that first stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, and go through all 3 of those stitches. And we're going to do this all the way across. Just 1/2 double crochet in each of the foundation double crochets across. And again, we aren't adding any, so your stitch count will be the same as the stitch count that you started with on your size. One-half double crochet in each of the stitches across. So I completed that row of half double crochets, and now we're going to chain 1 again and turn. And again, this chain 1 does not count as a stitch. On this next row, we're going to be doing front post double crochets alternating with half double crochets. So we're going to place a half double crochet in the first 2 stitches. And then we're going to stitch a front post double crochet around the post of the next half double crochet. So I've already yarned over. I'm going to go around the post portion of the half double crochet. Normally we stitch up here, but we're going around the post and stitching a double crochet. Then we'll stitch a half double crochet in the next. Then we'll stitch a front post double crochet in the next. And we'll alternate across stitching a half double crochet and then a front post double crochet. And we'll repeat this all the way across for row 3. Half double crochet in the next, double crochet, front post around the next. I said that backwards, didn't I? Half double crochet, front post double crochet in the next. And you can see that's going to give us a wonderful texture for that row. Repeat this all the way across for row 3. I have completed this row of the front post double crochet and then alternating with the half double crochet. Really pretty texture. Your last 2 stitches should be a half double crochet in the last 2. Then we'll chain 1 and turn. And again, your stitch count is going to be the same that we started with, whichever size that you are doing. Now this next row, we turned, chain 1. Again, our chain 1 does not count as a stitch, and we're just going to stitch a row of half double crochets. So we'll go in that first stitch and stitch a half double crochet in each of the stitches across. Isn't that pretty? So for row 4, we're just stitching 1 half double crochet in each of the stitches across. I completed that row of 1 half double crochet in each stitch across, and at the end of this row we're going to chain 3, and this chain 3 counts as a double crochet. Now we're going to double crochet in the next stitch. We're going to skip the next stitch, and then in the next stitch we're going to stitch a V-stitch, and the V-stitch is a double crochet, chain 1 and double crochet. And this is the same for all sizes. Skip the next stitch, V-stitch in the next, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. And we'll do this all the way across this row. Skip the next stitch, V-stitch in the next. Skip the next, V-stitch in the next. And this is the way you'll stitch row 5. V-stitch, skip a stitch, V-stitch, skip a stitch, V-stitch, skip a stitch, all the way around for this row. I have completed that row of V-stitches. I've got to put a double crochet in the last 2 stitches. Chain 1, 2, 3, and turn. And we're still turning. We haven't joined yet. We'll join after row 7, just so you know. And on this row, what we're going to do is our chain 3 counts as our first double crochet. We're going to double crochet in that next double crochet, and then we'll stitch a V-stitch right in that chain 1 space of the V-stitch. So double crochet, chain 1, double crochet right in the chain 1 space of the V-stitch. And that's exactly what we'll do all the way across. So we'll go to the next chain 1 space and stitch a V-stitch. There we go. Double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. And that's how this row 6 will work, is we'll stitch V-stitches in the V-stitches, working across this row. You can see how that looks. We're working a V-stitch and a V-stitch, working all the way across this row. I've completed row 6, stitching V-stitches in my V-stitches. I'm to the end of this row, and I'm going to stitch those last 2 double crochets. Chain 3 and turn. All right, so now for row 7, we're going to repeat exactly what we did for row 6. 1 double crochet in the first stitch here, because our chain 3 counts as our first double crochet, and then we'll stitch V-stitches in all of the chain 1 spaces of our V-stitches. And at the end of row 7, I'm going to show you how to join it, and then we'll be stitching around instead of back and forth. All right, so to begin row 7, our chain 3 counts is our first double crochet. We'll stitch a double crochet in that first double crochet, and then we'll stitch a V-stitch in the chain 2 space of the V-stitch. Double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. And then we'll repeat stitching V-stitches in the V-stitches all the way across for row 7. And again, when we get to the end of row 7, I'm going to show you how to join it together, and then we can start stitching around instead of across. So we're stitching 1 V-stitch in each of the V-stitches all the way across our row. I have finished row 7. Here's my last V-stitch, and then I stitched 1 double crochet in those last 2 stitches. And what we're going to do is we're going to join in a circle. Now make sure you're on the front side of your work, and you'll know that by where your front post double crochets on this row should be facing up. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to join to that chain 3 with a slip stitch. So once we slip stitched, we're going to slip stitch between the first 2 double crochets, and then we're going to chain 4. This chain 4 counts as a double crochet chain 1, and then we're going to place another double crochet right in that same space between those first 2 double crochets. So what we did is we turned those 2 double crochets into a V-stitch. So now we turned that 2 double crochets into a V-stitch. And now we're just going to repeat around what we've been doing, stitching a V-stitch in the chain 2 space of the next V-stitch. And we'll do this moving all the way around our poncho or ponchette And of course you can see my yarn changed colors again. We're stitching V-stitches all the way around, and then when we come back around here, we're going to repeat what we did here and put a V-stitch between those 2 double crochets. And then we can join to our chain 3, and that gives us a whole row of V-stitches. Alright, so let's just keep moving along, stitching V-stitches in our V-stitches, working around this row. V-stitches in the chain 2 space of our V-stitches. Working all the way around now instead of back and forth. Whoops, I got a knot I need to take care of. I've stitched that row of V-stitches all the way around. Here's my last V-stitch, and then we have those 2 double crochets together from our previous row. So we're going to stitch a V-stitch between those 2 double crochets, just like we did at the beginning after we joined. We're going to join to this V-stitch with a slip stitch, which we joined in the chain 3, not the chain 4. The chain 3, because that chain 4 was needed to be our chain 1 for the V-stitch. Now we're going to slip stitch in that first chain 1 space and chain 4. And this chain 4 counts as a double crochet chain 1. And then we'll double crochet in that same chain 1 space. And we'll just repeat what we've been doing. V-stitches in the V-stitches, working all the way around. And see, now our straight collar is now working around for the ponchette. All right, so what I'm doing is I'm stitching a V-stitch in each of the V-stitches, working all the way around our poncho or ponchette, and then we'll join like we did on this one. Alrighty, so V-stitch in each of the chain 1 spaces of the V-stitches, working all the way around our poncho or ponchette. Then when we get all the way back around, we'll join to the top of the chain 3 like we did on this row. So I completed another row. We're going to join to the chain 3 with a slip stitch. And then again, we're going to slip stitch in that chain 1 space and chain 4. And double crochet in that same chain 1 space. Now, because we want our poncho to begin to flare out a little bit, we're going to place a chain 1 between our V-stitches for the next 3 rows. So what we're going to do is we'll stitch our V-stitch in our V-stitch, and then we'll chain 1. So we're doing the same thing. We're stitching V-stitches in our V-stitches. We're just adding a chain 1 in between each V-stitch. And this is going to cause our poncho to flare out just a little bit more. Okay, and then we're going to stitch this all the way around, join to the chain 3, and then we'll repeat this for 2 more rows. So we'll have a total of 3 rows with the V-stitches with the chain 1 in between the V-stitches. So V-stitch, chain 1, all the way around for 3 rows. So here's our 3 rows of V-stitches with our chain 1 in between. And that just helps it to flare out some, and we want it to flare out even more. So then we're going to stitch 3 more rows, only we're going to put a chain 2 in between our V-stitches. And so we'll stitch our V-stitch, and then we'll chain 2 and stitch our V-stitch. And that's going to cause our poncho to flare out even more so that it fits nicely across our shoulders and down our body. And we'll stitch 3 rows of the V-stitch with the chain 2 in between. So just to recap, we stitched 3 rows of V-stitches with chain 1 in between, and now we're going to stitch 3 rows of the V-stitch with the chain 2 in between. And this is the same for all sizes. Now I brought the camera out so that you can see how it flares out in order to fit across your neck and then across your shoulders. I also added a couple extra rows on mine. If you want to make your poncho or ponchette longer, just continue to repeat the V-stitch with the chain 2 in between for as many rows as you would like. And each row measures approximately an inch. So that can kind of give you an idea of how many additional rows you want to do to make your poncho longer. So once your poncho is the length that you want, here's our last V-stitch and chain 2. Looks like a chain 1. All right, now we have a chain 2. We're going to join to the top of that chain 3 like we've been doing. And now what we want to do is make the trim. And so what we're going to do is stitch a row of single crochets around. To make that single crochet trim, we're going to stitch a single crochet in the double crochet, a single crochet in the chain 1 space, a single crochet in the double crochet, and then 2 single crochets in the chain 2 space or around that chain 2 chain. And we'll do this all the way around this row. Single crochet in the double crochet, single crochet in the chain 2 space, single crochet in the double crochet, and then 2 single crochets around that chain 2. And this is going to give us a nice even edge because we're going to be adding a toggle trim, which is really fun, and I think it adds a little extra fun to our ponchette. All right, so just to repeat, what I'm doing is I'm adding a single crochet trim around the bottom of my ponchette, single crochet in the double crochet, single crochet in the chain 1 space, single crochet in the double crochet, and then 2 single crochets in the chain 2 space or around that chain 2, whichever way you want to call that is fine. All right, and that's just going to give us a nice even edge to add our toggle trim. So I finished my single crochet trim around the bottom of my poncho. I'm going to join to the first single crochet with a slip stitch and chain 1. Alrighty, now the last thing we need to do on the bottom of our poncho is to add that toggle stitch trim. We're going to half double crochet in the next 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we're going to chain 6. We're going to double crochet in the 3rd chain from the hook. So 1, 2, 3. Double crochet. There we go. And then we're going to slip stitch in those last 3 chains. 1, 2, and 3. Then we'll have double crochet in the next stitch. And there's our toggle. All right, so now we have 1/2 double crochet. We're going to have double crochet in the next 3. 1, 2, and 3. That gives us 1, 2, 3, 4. And we'll repeat that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Double crochet in the 3rd chain from the hook. And then slip stitch in those last 3. And then half double crochet in the next stitch. And do 3 more half double crochets. So there's our second toggle. Isn't that cute? Just adds a little bit of fun to our poncho. And we'll do this all the way around. Chain 6. Double crochet in the 3rd chain from the hook. And slip stitch in those last 3 chains. There we go. And then half double crochet in the next stitch. Pull through all 3 of those. There we go. And then we'll stitch 3 more half double crochets. 1, 2, 3. So we're stitching a toggle stitch with 4 half double crochets in between each one. Let me do another one so you can see what I'm doing. All right, so there's the 6. Double crochet in the 3rd chain from the hook. And then slip stitch in those last 3 chains. And then half double crochet in the next stitch. And then half double crochet in the next 3. Isn't that just adorable? I just love it, and I think it adds just a fun touch to this poncho. And we'll continue this all the way around and then join back, and we'll be done with the bottom. And the only thing we'll have left is, of course, to finish off the buttonhole area and add the button. Thing that we need to do is to add our trim in the slit at the neck, and of course add our button. All right, so we're going to join our yarn right in that first stitch. And then we're going to evenly single crochet down the side. And I'm going to go right over that tail of yarn, and that'll keep it down, and I won't have to weave that in because I'm already stitching over it. And when I stitch on the side of the rows instead of in the tops of the rows, I try really hard to stitch in the sides of the stitches and not in the holes, so I don't have too many gaping holes. Now occasionally you may have to go in a hole, but you want to try for the most part not to have to do that, and to try to keep your stitches nice and close. Alrighty, so I'm down to the inside there. I want to put a stitch down in the bottom. There we go. So we can go through some of those stitches. And now I want to stitch back up this other side. And really, this is just to give it a nice edge so that it looks pretty and doesn't have that raw edge. And it also helps it hold its shape. There is not a set amount of stitches that need to be in here. You just need to eyeball it and make sure it looks pretty. So there's the trim on that slit at the top. And now we need to make our buttonhole. So what we're going to do is chain 6. And then count down 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And join to that slip stitch. And chain 1. And then we're going to go and stitch back up this buttonhole just to reinforce it and make it nice and sturdy. So we're just going to place some single crochet stitches. Whoopsie, got a little knot there. There we go. 6 or 8, however many will fit in there, just so it's going to hold the wear and tear of putting a button in and out of it. So it's a nice sturdy buttonhole. And then we'll just go ahead and single crochet to the top of that single crochet and cut that yarn. And of course we'll need to weave that in to the back. And we'll just do that with our needle. I'm going to do it a couple of times because I want to make sure that that buttonhole is not going to come undone. Going through stitches, I'm going through the fibers of the yarn so that it's in there good and sturdy. And then the last thing we need to do is attach our button. So I'm going to cut off some yarn, thread that on my needle. We want our button right here. So what I like to do is I like to mark where I'm going to put it. I'm going to come up from the bottom actually. Make sure I'm going through stitches. Make sure I leave myself enough to knot that up. And I've just got 2 holes in this button. There we go. And when you're sewing on a button, especially one that's going to get a little bit of wear and tear, make sure you're going through stitches of your crochet fabric, of your crochet project, and not the holes in between, especially a button that's going to be opened and closed a lot. I will be honest with you and tell you that once I have my poncho buttoned and I just go ahead and slip it over my head, I don't really open and close the button. So it can be a little bit decorative. Alright, so now I've sewed through till I'm happy it's going to stay put, and I'm going to knot this up in the back. There's 2, here's 3 knots. I'm going to go ahead and add a 4th one. There we go. I don't think that's going anywhere. But if you feel like your button is not going to hold, you can go ahead and add just a little dot of a fabric glue or a fray check, and that'll keep that knot from coming undone. All right, so there's my button. And the placement of where you wear it is up to you. You can put it right on the front, or you can set it a little bit to the side. But that is our ponchette.